I could give a little bit of the background here and how I got involved in this whole conversation. But as many know, I think that High Five has a long history of working with sports clubs, professional sports organizations, particularly hockey clubs. Um, and so, that started way back when, because as you mentioned, and we were just chatting a moment ago, the Greenwich swimming and diving teams coming out to work with you all again. And this has got to be close to 30 years of them coming out to High Five to do preseason programming and kick off their season. But then, in the 2010s, we got this great invitation to work with the Boston Bruins, and then have had this storied history now of various professional hockey clubs that we've gotten a chance to work with at High Five. And then you all, after I had left, you all continued that with several more opportunities here. And so that opportunity presented itself again, and you recently just got back from a trip to Europe to work with another professional club. And so early on in your planning stages, you were organizing and reached out to me to talk a little through the plan, which was really fun to chat with the two of you several weeks, 6 months ago, just to look at your plan and what your agenda was, and kind of talk through the strategies and the objectives and what you were trying to accomplish and how those activities might feed into that. And so had a really fun conversation with you all talking about that. And then you get to Europe. The whole trip actually happens, and you get out there, and you two arrive safely. And this is the sort of the bearing the lead part, that but your game bag does not. Your activities. How much of your stuff made it versus didn't make it? Did anything make it to Europe?
I would say half of it, maybe less than half. The stuff that we could do easy was there. The stuff we needed, because without it we can't run something, was not there.
Yeah, totally. I would say that there was 3 different material aspects. And so 2 were bags that we had checked, and then 1 was equipment that had already been with the team that we had sent to them last year. So we had access to that. We didn't know exactly what it was, so that ended up being a very happy surprise. But the piece of luggage that did not come was specifically packed with the items that we had packed that were uniquely purchased and designed for this job, including the big puzzle that we had consulted with you about, Chris, and these single color poly spots for a very specific initiative. So we did not have those.
Wow. Yes. So this is that sort of nightmare scenario that I feel like I've traveled a lot for conferences and other programming opportunities. I think a lot of folks who listen to this podcast also are in that boat where, can you imagine getting to your job, having this plan in place, putting lots of energy and detail into the plan, and then prime resources that you need are not available to you, or broken, or whatever that might be. So when you all told me that, and I got the text from you that you were back in the States, and that you had your multi-page detailed plan looked to be boiled down to an index card in the end. I thought, wow, this is fascinating, and I have no doubt, and I'm sure you've gotten the feedback already, probably from the club, but the program went very well to all accounts. Yes.
Yes.
And so I thought maybe it would be really fun to have a conversation to see if we can unpack how did that happen? How do you get to a European destination with a plan that is detailed and all these different pieces, and then not have the resources that you need to deliver that actual program? And how do you pivot and turn, and what did that look like? I've been just really curious. I want to hear the story, because all I know is that the bag didn't make it, and you did a great program that was based on an index card. So I'm really excited to hear a little bit about from you, and the folks who are listening to this are probably tired of listening to me talk, because you are the ones who actually lived this experience.
And Phil, so you have the context. I'm not sure if I include you in the text, because Chris, you were such a huge part of us planning, especially the cycle time puzzle. And I just texted Chris a picture of our day 2 index card, and it was this is what we ended up with, and what a journey from this multi-page document. Phil, do you want to start with the story, or shall I?
Sure. So I think that I could see it as 2 parts. One, I think it would be worthy of us sharing maybe the original agenda, maybe the goals, the themes of the program, and then I could share the specifics of the story of the lost bag up until the point when we had to make a new plan. Lisa, do you want to talk about like the themes of the program? And I just want to kind of mention, we're not going to mention the name of the team, or the coach, and the reason for that is because we were asked. Their season has just about to start. It's actually starting as of this recording next week, and so we can't disclose any of the information about who we work with, for obvious privacy reasons. I like at one point they referred to us as their competitive edge, and I think that was a nice little thought to be like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. But we won't mention that. But we can mention the themes and the activities that we were going to do, and then we can talk about the change. So
sure.
Yeah,
when we create our spin-off company, we're calling it Competitive
Edge.
It is top secret. Nobody can find us.
Nobody can find us.
We don't talk about any clients. We've got no testimonials.
Nothing.
I can set the stage. So this is a program where, as you know, I mean, in many of our work, we will either meet a client on a challenge course, or we will host a client at our site. And this was the client hosting us at their site, at their arena. So we were not using a challenge course. We were completely reliant on our facilitation skills and the portable activities that we had. And there were some outcomes and some themes. I have the agenda up. I can read them. So these sort of outcomes as condensed by us, but through consultation with the coaching staff, were that the team is more connected by the end of the retreat, that they have had fun together, and that they're set on a collective direction and the sense of this is how we do things, which I would paraphrase as like establishing their culture. And then the team, the coach has infused some very specific themes within the team, and all of our activities sort of funneled back up to this theme. And that the themes are 4 of them. One is be ready. The second theme is accept new people on the team and accept new roles. The 4th one is expanding leadership, like beyond your typical definition of leadership, captain and so forth. And then this concept of contender to champion, and that massive step that goes from being very close to then taking over a championship. So those are the themes, and then starting with the outcomes that we had designed for. And then I think, that we met. This is interesting, Chris, because Phil and I have not really debriefed this. So this is in some ways like a very public recorded debrief of our experience. But that was what the design was. And we had indoor and outdoor facilities, non-challenge course in which to address them.
Love it.
And I would also add from the logistics of it is that we didn't know the space that we were coming into. We were told we would have indoor locations. We were told we would have an outdoor location. So we had to plan it without knowing the location, which also adds a level of challenge to a plan when you don't know where you're going. And so the initial step in terms of the travel out was we had given ourselves a planning day. So we would travel out, we would deal with our jet lag, we would have a plan day where we'd be able to check out the site and location, and then we had 2 days of actually running the program. And so to go back to the travel portion of it, for people who don't know Cycle Time Puzzle, and I'll include a link to it in the description of this so people can check it out, but Cycle Time Puzzle is a big wooden puzzle, and ultimately we put it into one of our cube bags, which is it looks like a long black ski bag, and that's the best way it was able to fit. It was relatively heavy. We stuffed spot markers in there as well because we were going to do an activity called memory, and also we were going to do key punch. We'd bought different spot markers because we wanted to have this idea that they'd come up with a plan, and then at some point we would change the plan, and so they'd have to deal with it on the fly. Partly because this team had a relatively successful season. The previous season, they'd made it all the way to the final game to win, and then they lost that game. So it was one of those cases where they get to game 7, they lose, we wanted to build in this idea that suddenly stuff was going to change, and how do you adapt to that change? That was an away game as well, so that add another element. So we were always trying to consider like what had they had in the previous season, and so how can we tie that in? So we had this big bag, and I carried the bag, hurt my shoulder in the process carrying this like awkward bag through the airport. Like anyone who's ever traveled is like knows the annoyance of carrying bags, but if you've ever flown through Boston, some of the terminals getting to stuff is long, from central parking to the Terminal E International was not convenient. So I'm carrying this bag, and then I get all the way to the baggage claim area, and evidently the other logistical component to this, which is also stressful, would probably cause more stress prior to than anything else, was that we did not organize the flight. So the client was the one who booked the flight through another travel agent that they used to travel to move their players around during the season. So there was all this system of multi-phased, like different people, middle people. We couldn't figure out hardly any of the logistics. We knew that they had paid for bags for us, but when I got there, I had 2 checked bags and they only had the receipt for 1. And so I was like, okay, so I'm going to have to check this big oversized bag. And in process of checking it was going to cost us an extra $180. So I was like, oh, this is going to be annoying. But can we ensure it will get there? They listed it as priority luggage. Okay, so we'll pay the money, we'll pay the extra money to ensure that it gets to the destination. And so that was the hope. We get to our final destination after a couple of flights. And we waited for a long, long time in the oversized baggage area. And there were a lot of people there, like waiting for extra oversized baggage. And eventually our bag did not show up. And it was the one that was the big one, the one that hurt my shoulder over. And so I had to go.
Priority written very large.
Priority written on it, very clearly identifiable bag. And so I went and had to go to the baggage claim lost check area. You know, I had to go and put in a claim for lost baggage. So I get like this code that I can check in on. And they were like, no worries, it will definitely be here. We'll get it shipped to your hotel in the next day or 2. Now, we were ultimately in our location for 7 days, and the bag eventually showed up at the airport as we returned and landed in Boston. I got an alert saying like, congrats, your bag has arrived at your destination.
No.
But we had just literally landed back in the US. And so then I've had to go. In fact, the last week I've been dealing with finally getting our bag returned. It has returned. And I almost wish it had like, there was that, I think it was like a kid who lost their stuffed animal. And like the airport had done this big thing about like showing the journey that it went on. I wish they'd have done it with the bag, because it would have been quite interesting to know, where has it been? Has it traveled, circumnavigated the globe in order to just return?
Did that bag get on, and which facilitators in said other country could have had a really great set of props?
I like on the process of getting the bag returned to us, it was like this, they used a courier system to be able to get the bag driven back to High Five, and it was almost like an Uber setup. They gave me the name of the driver and everything. I could track his location. His name was Marty. It was a very entertaining day in the office, because I was giving folks in the office like half an hour updates on Marty's location. I printed a big photo of his face and posted it around the office. Have you seen this man? Which was very entertaining. And then I know for a fact that he stopped at the Holyoke Mall and was there for like 2.5 hours, maybe watched a movie. I have no idea. That's the problem with those tracking services. So there's a lot of mystery to what happened to the bag, but eventually it did return back to us. So that's like the bag story. And we had to get picked up at the airport by a wonderful driver who was like the equipment manager of the team. So it wasn't like it's not like we could stop at any point. We like had to keep moving through the processes and plans, because we were not in charge of any of the logistics. We had to get taken to the airport and get taken from the airport to the hotel. And so, that created quite a lot of anxiety, because we knew now we didn't have half the stuff, and we could not guarantee when it would arrive to us.
And this is, I think, sort of where I have a couple of questions that I want to ask you both, and maybe the first one is sort of the last question I could ask you, but is, you had just said you haven't really debriefed this experience yet together. So let me ask you a couple of questions I might ask if I was kind of running through the rehash of this program to sort of evaluate things. How do you feel the end result of your program went? Like, did you feel like you met your objectives that Lisa, you just laid out all the sort of goals and objectives and where you were headed. Do you feel like you met those?
Yes.
Good. I'm glad I gave you a question that you could. So, at what point did you feel like we need plan B? Was there any amount of hope that you had that the bag's going to get here? They're not going to, this isn't going to happen to us. How long did you wait before you were like, we need plan B?
I mean, Phil, you might remember it differently, but I think one of the reasons for the successful outcome is that we pivoted pretty quickly. So what Phil didn't say was that day that we arrived, Sunday was his birthday. And we went and we settled into our hotel. We took the train into town, and I wanted to find a, birthday dinner for Phil, which was just a regular dinner, but it was his birthday. So we call it a birthday dinner. And I think it was Phil who started this sort of concept of like, let's just accept that it's not going to come, because we realized that even if it did come, the airport was 45, 50 minutes away. We were going to have to take the time. Phil couldn't designate someone else to go get it because it was attached to his passport. So I think what happened was the program started Tuesday morning. This was Sunday night. It was kind of like, well, we can find a store and get some other things, or we can just... Phil, do you remember it this way? It was like, let's just focus on day one, because we knew that we had enough materials to run day one. And then we said, we'll worry about day two. And what I recall from me at that moment was like, yeah, this is something that's pretty normal for me. You have a whole plan for a multi-day program, but you really don't look into day two in detail until you've lived day one. And you can say, I think it would probably be likely that we would have ended day one anyway and said, you know what, given the space, given all these things, maybe this is the direction to go. And I think the plan that we ended up with was the right plan. It helped that we didn't have, we did have some materials to work with. We weren't completely left without anything. Yeah. So that helped. But I think the fact that, I think it was the eve of our prep day, we were like, let's plan as if we're not going to have this second bag. Yeah. And I think that was a good move, because if we had been sort of, well, let's hope it comes, I think it would have kept this like window open on my computer that would have drained my mental battery of just wondering.
I also think there's some fortune in the bag not coming, to be honest, because I think that had the bag arrived, I think we would have been tied to doing the activities that we had in the agenda. And I do think that the location and the space was not ideal for that activity. The spaces that we were given ultimately were smaller and full of stuff that was there was less open space than we had anticipated and hoped for. Like we had you can use this room, and it's like the players' lounge, but it has like couches and tables and there's kitchen, and it's like there's no open space in there. You can go to our locker room, but like once again, the locker room is full of stuff. Or you can go, like it was never. We can go to the weight room, but we have to move the stuff. It just ends up being that it was the only ideal location that we had for a large space was underneath the arena, almost where the Zambonis drive. And that caused some positives, because we did an ARSO Co where one of the distractors in that game decided to grab the keys to a Zamboni and drive it through the game as a distraction. And we've never had that happen before. So like some positives in that space, but ultimately there was other people moving around consistently, and other people using the space. It was a shared location. So I think that ultimately it kind of reinforced for me, like as I've got more experienced, I'm more comfortable with no props. Like my prop bag has got smaller. And so it was almost going like anti that, where we're like, oh, we've got prop bags, we're going to use props. And then the props don't show up, and it's like, oh, we can default into not using the props, which is actually relatively comfortable. So our day one didn't really have to change at all. And our day two, I think we re-planned it the evening of day one. It was just a case of like, okay, look, we can just do this now. and we can still do initiatives. We can still do a problem-solving big activity. We ended up doing Ubuntu mimeograph as our final instead of cycle time, and the space worked out well for that. And I actually feel like it was a really successful program. And I don't know if we'd have stuck with our original agenda, would it have been as successful? And I think it's partly due to space. And then I can imagine us having this big bag and over-promising this big activity, and then the space being limiting, and then us scrapping it anyway. And I think that would have actually had a negative impact on like the coaching staff seeing some of like, oh, we never got to use the big thing. They didn't have context for it, so they didn't even worry. So what we did was great.
And I think there's two things I want to bring up here. One is temperament, and I'll get back to that. But the other one is Phil and I shared this reflection after a conference we went to in April, that we heard presenters almost unintentionally apologize for things that they weren't going to get to. Like, oh, I was going to do this and I didn't get to this. I was going to do this. And I think based on the value of the insight that I got from that conversation with Phil, I mentioned to the coach that one of our bags didn't come, almost like a ha-ha, but we did not draw that out. We didn't over apologize. And I think even a year ago, I probably would have like belabored that a little bit, almost like unnecessarily so. Like nobody needed to know. I mean, we had made our plan available to the coaching staff. It wasn't something that they were particularly like needing to know the details. So I think for them, the program went off exactly as we had planned it. Like if we hadn't mentioned that we were missing a bag, I don't think that would have become and also like we didn't need to share that with other people. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's a fascinating concept that you're bringing up, because it is a concept that we teach here where I am at Shavers Creek and at Penn State. Our recreation students come through our programs and we're teaching them facilitation and interpretation and all of these other things. And one of my colleagues here, and he was actually one of my professors when I was a student here, uses the term chocolate caking people. And that has a specific definition of saying, you say like, oh, I was going to bring you a chocolate cake, but sorry, I forgot it. And now all that I want is chocolate cake. Like I can't stop thinking about chocolate cake. Like that's now becomes the thing. And so teaching these facilitators here and these young professionals getting out into the field, that nobody needs to know what was or was not on any plans. They know the experience that you give them. And so if you continually refer to things that aren't happening or you don't have or you can't do, then that's all they're going to be thinking about is those props or those things or that activity. This is something I used to train when I was doing a lot more of the challenge course training stuff, is to not tell your program participants what your next activities would be. Because as you said, as you were evaluating this experience, working with this team, looking at the dynamics and what was going on, your day 2 plan, you probably shouldn't fully know what that will look like until you really have a sense of, is this team showing us the dynamics that a coach maybe shared with us in an assessment in the beginning? And so we're making that adjustment and adaptability as we go. And if we get too rigid in those things, then we lose the ability to meet the needs of what the group is showing us from what we're observing and we're reacting to. But then also, especially with younger participants, I feel like this is sort of one of those big ones with kids. If you say like, all right, and then after this, we're going to do the wall. And the whole time they're just going to be staring at that wall. Like, why didn't we get to go to the wall? I was like, well, because you're not ready. Right. And this group hasn't shown me that that was a big training point that I would often tell new facilitators of saying, you don't tip your hand too much as to what's coming. You need to know, right. But having the program participants know just what they need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that chocolate caking thing is a perfect analogy. And I think it didn't really take discipline. I just think we didn't make it an issue for other people. Yeah. And I think that for me, the only thing I held on to, and I think I let it go pretty quick, but I had it for a little bit, is this sunken cost fallacy of, we put such a design and such a plan and then all that money to ship it there. I felt disappointed, but that disappointment was separate from panic. Like, what are we going to do? It was more like, I was really looking forward to this, which is not the reason to do an activity with a group.
Right.
Like, I understand that, but there was a few hours. So I was like, I'm not stressed. I'm disappointed, is I think what I said in the text to somebody. Like,
and I don't want to. I want to go where you all want to go with the conversation. But one of the things that we texted back and forth about a little bit is the value of planning and preparation, and how that all that planning and preparation for the design, even if you don't use the design, how valuable that is. And I would argue in some ways that all that design and preparation and everything that'll get used. It just isn't going to be with that program. Cycle time in that format will come out somewhere in your future facilitation or in mine. Maybe I'm the one who benefits from it, but it's going to happen somewhere. And then that's going to be the value recaptured in that design effort. But yeah, talk a little bit about sort of from your impressions, the elements of the planning that you did that really had an impact on the program's success, even though you didn't deliver the program that you had designed.
Well, I would say for me, I think the important part of the planning was like understanding the thematic parts of the activities. So like the framing of why are we going to set this activity up? What's the goal of this activity? And then what are we hoping to be able to reflect upon after the fact? Because that's something, even though we changed the activities, the theme of the program stayed consistent throughout. And I think that I think is a really important design aspect of a plan, is like understanding the whys behind the activities rather than just saying, oh, I really like this activity. Like Cycle Time had a goal, and I think all we were able to do is just flip that into a different initiative. Like, all right, we don't have this thing, we have Ubuntu cards. We know we can do Mimeo. And in fact, what I think is an important thing to mention is that we had worked with this exact team the prior year in a slightly different way. We couldn't get out to them, so we had given the coach, and we trained him on how to use some of these activities and given him agenda and activities so he could lead it. And it was fascinating in the reflection with some of the players. I was just sitting with them at the players' lounge and just chatting and saying, how was the program going? Even though some of the players had seen some of the activities again, like intentionally we were trying to do new stuff. And in not having the props, we had to resort to, things that we were really comfortable with, which is some of the stuff they'd done prior. And we were a little nervous about doing repeat activities, but it was one of those classic experiences where we're worried about the repeat activity, but we're a different facilitator. They're a different group of players, even though they're in the structure. The framing that we gave was so different that like the number of players who said like, this is a completely different activity. Like they had actually come in and it was actually really beneficial for our framing again. Once again, if we go back to the idea, or like they had a season where they struggled with change and adapting to that change and overcoming challenges in the last moment when the pressure is on. Well, when we had the activities that they thought they had understood, they knew, they went back with their teams and plans. They had some of their senior leaders who had been there before say, I know this activity, this is how we're going to do it. And then they come out to look at the solution, whatever it is in Mimeo, and found out the way I was framing it was completely different. The structure I'd given it is different. The timings were different. The overall, and they had to completely go back and say, well, scrap all that. Like it wasn't the same. And so I had players reflecting on, well, what a difference to have the same activity framed in a different way, but also with different facilitators.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, I think the themes were the part that we were able to hold on to. And we just kept throwing in different activities to kind of meet that. The other part is I remember reflecting after day one with Lisa. I was exhausted after day one. That was partly jet lag. It was partly we had been put out on a field. We had this field, and classic programming curse, there was a lawnmower. Anytime we've ever run like high five, I think is a curse, but we have out on a field at High Five's location, pretty much every time we have a large group out on that field, lawnmowers are mowing that.
Always.
Right. And so we go out to another country in Europe, 4,000 miles away, and exactly the same happens.
Well, and to be clear, it was a turf field, but they were mowing all around the turf, the grass. So they weren't even like, it was.
And so, and the audio wasn't great. So I was having to yell, like it was exhausting. But the other exhausting part is we didn't know the group as well, and we hadn't connected with them. And so now we have this full day. The day two was so much better because we knew the players, and we also knew what the things they kind of liked. Like they like to talk. So let's give them some activities that want to talk. They loved playing games. So let's change it and play some games. And so the theme stayed the same, but we're able to meet now the group much better for day two. And so that's what, like, we were most nervous about day 2 because we didn't have the props. I would say it was the day 2 ended up being most comfortable because we changed it and we also knew the players, but we kept the themes the same.
That's interesting. Anything you'd add to that, Lisa?
No, I that captures it, Phil. Good job.
Yeah. That's so. It is interesting when you think about when I look at some folks know this. I keep a notebook that I historically have written out any of my plans in this notebook, and then as I'm doing the program, I'll scratch stuff off, write stuff in the margins, and it's my record of my programming. I have notebooks that date back to high five training days and even just probably a little bit before that. So I could go back and say like, oh, the Greenwich program in 2010, what did we do? And I could go back to that notebook and see what I did with that group at that time. But the thing that's fascinating is if you flip back through that, I could just photocopy the same page over and over again. Because as you said this, Phil, is like that there's certain activities that you're comfortable with, and it's just about framing activities to meet the goals or objectives or the themes that you're trying to hit on. And so one activity there, I know myself, I probably have 5 activities that I put into most of my program designs. They're going to show up. And it's because they're a versatile activity that hits on lots of different themes. And as a facilitator, if I can just frame this activity to focus their energy and their attention in a certain way, in a certain area, get the reflection going in that direction, then it's going to hit on those themes, or modify an activity to sort of bring about something that I want to showcase. Mimeograph is one of those that's in a lot of programming that I do.
You know, and for me, this taps into when I was new at Project Adventure and I was trying to become a certified trainer back in the day. I learned this model that at the time I thought was kind of tacky, and a model is called APPLE. You may have heard of it. APPLE: assess, plan, prepare, lead, evaluate. And I think in reflection on this program, that flow, that sequence is very much ingrained in the way that I get ready for a program. And I think that the separation of the 2 phases that start with P, prepare and plan. So it's, we did our assessment with the team. And then at some point I do think it'd be cool to sort of just touch on temperament, maybe disc styles, and how the co-leadership flows in. But I started with like a blank sheet and put down the themes. That's the planning part. And then we backfilled the activities to meet the themes. And I think that because we started with the themes and how they flowed throughout the 2 days, it made it much more comfortable to let go of the activities. And then we literally separated, like our packing day was completely separate from our planning day. And so having like the logistics part be completely separate from the more intellectual program design piece really helps me discipline and reminds me. And I think this conversation reminds me that program design is different for every person. We all have our own style, but for me, separating out the materials, the logistics, all that stuff did in this case serve me well, because it helped me get to know the plan much better than the preparation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I know sometimes when I'm program planning, I need to go stand in front of the equipment.
Yeah.
And just stare at it. And
absolutely.
Look at and like,
right.
Just try to be inspired by something that's, going to fit. But it's like, I love that sequence that you're sharing with folks, is that focusing on the assessment should give you your objectives and your themes. You can't start picking activities to work with a group until you know where you're going and what you're trying to accomplish. And then starting to backfill into that assessment what could be a potential activity that could address this, whatever that might be.
Right. And I think that does come with experience. I don't know, as a newer facilitator with a less sort of deep bag of tricks, or knowing like the tinker concept of how to make them meet different outcomes, if I would have been able to do that, because I don't think it's inappropriate to say, I love this activity, I want to find a way to do this on this program day. That's totally appropriate. But for me, that sort of ingrained process of do the objectives, make the sketch based on the objectives, and then backfill the activities serves me well. But I don't feel like that has to be the case for everybody.
Yeah. So I want to touch on something that you just brought up a moment ago that we texted about earlier, actually, and it's something that we chat about here a lot and in trainings and working with students and things, which is co-facilitating. And so, if I were to think of a pair of people that I would send into a foreign country with minimal resources and a broken plan because of things, I would pick the two of you. You would be on my short list. And part of that is, so why? What is it about sending the two of you into this scenario that it worked as well as it did, and you were able to meet your objectives and come out on the other end, not only with a successful program, but one that, for all intents and purposes, the client had no idea. It sounds from your telling of the story that your clients, the team that you're working with, the coaches, really didn't know that you had suffered a setback that for many facilitators would have been extremely detrimental to the program. But so they didn't know that. So what is it about the two of you working together that you feel like worked so well? You had mentioned like disc profiles, temperaments, those sorts of things feeding into it. That's really interesting area. I have some other curiosities, but I'll stop.
I mean, I can start it off, Phil, and I'd love to hear your thoughts too. I mean, I think that it would be possible for this to be productive with people who have completely different temperaments. Like, I'm not saying that this is the only way, but I know for me, I felt like at no point did I have to like manage Phil's stress. And I hope that it was the same. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't feel like, ooh, when we facilitate, we have multiple clients. We have the actual end user that we're facilitating. We have the person who is, doing the needs assessment with us. And then another client is oftentimes our co-leader. And that's the way it should be. Like, we want to help them have a positive experience. In this case, I think just familiarity with each other was helpful. And I do think Phil and I, on the disc profile are on the heavier on the S steadiness style. So I think that sort of radical acceptance of like, this is the way it is. Let's not dwell on how it could be was helpful. And just that trust. And it's so funny because I think there might be this impression on this podcast that Phil and I work together all the time, but we don't. I mean, like it was pretty unusual for us to have 2 days of facilitating together. And yet it just felt like there was just this trust that it was going to work out.
Yeah, I would add that it's also there's acceptance from both of us that we're not like I would say rock star facilitators, even though like it might sometimes like, oh yeah, we're good facilitators. But I think that in terms of like we were able to acknowledge after day one, like we were very honest about each other's energy, or like I'm like, oh man, I was tired. And there was jet lag involved in that too. So it was it felt like work. Like day one felt like we were pushing things. Like things didn't flow perfectly well. Lisa got stung by a wasp on the day one too. So, like there were lots of things that were like happening. And I think that we were very honest about it with each other. Like, and I think that helps. That's a part of the trust part. But like, there was never any second guessing stuff because we were very honest about like, hey, I didn't feel like this went well, or we were able to evaluate the day one as well, and help each other, support each other through. No, I think it was fine, but like we were both in our heads about certain things. Like I was having to like yell because the space was so hard, so my voice was going, and so I think that there's always like we're trying to evaluate through the process. And we're not trying to fake it till you make it nonsense. Like we were just very clear, like, no, we're getting tired and we need to change it up. But also we did have that just radical acceptance. I think that there was a clear point on the planning day that the bag was not going to come. And if the bag does come anyway, there's nothing we can do about it. And so I think that sort of allowed us to be much more relaxed about the process. And I think as well, like if you are in a space where you have option to go and find stuff, and I think like I've been to conferences where stuff hasn't shown up, and I've had a vehicle, so I'm like, oh, I'm going to drive to a toy store, or there's always that kind of mindset. I think even day one we wandered around the main town and we found stuff, and we're like, oh, maybe we'll come back to this toy store, and it's like, I honestly, it's easier when you don't have those options, where you're like forced to be like, no, this is it. We don't have a backup plan. Our plan has to be with whatever we've got on hand. And that made it easier because if you have like, oh, I could maybe do this, then your brain is in all these different spots.
Yeah.
And it makes it way harder. And so the other thing to add is like we had this plan coming in. We arrive at the location. They had a box of stuff because we had sent it to them the previous year. But stuff was in the box that we weren't anticipating was going to be there. One of them was two perfectly full sets of key punch sets with spot markers in it. So suddenly we were like, oh, no, we have some of the stuff we need. So we were able to adapt somewhat. And it was a relieving point because we had a backup plan. We were able to say, well, no, we've got these things now, so maybe we'll go back to previous plans. We were able to change on the fly, but like we had set ourselves with the mindset that we are going to deal with whatever we have, and it's going to be fine. Yeah. And once we were in that headspace, anything else that happens beyond that was going to be easier because we'd already let go of it. Like we're not holding on to it anymore, and time is going to keep moving forward. So we've just got to deal with it. And I think that that worked out well.
Yeah. I want to name one of the things that you just talked about, like that a learning that in my mind you just described, and I don't know if you caught what you said, but Lisa a moment ago was talking about that Apple process and how the separating even of your packing day and your planning day, that mind work, and then separating those out, how important that can be, where you really are looking at themes and you're planning, and then you go into preparation mode. And then Phil, you talked about the distraction of going into a toy store, and the challenge with that kind of on-site planning and that distraction element is that you're doing it backwards, because now you're trying to shoehorn all the toys that you find into a new activity that you're working it backwards. You're not looking at the themes anymore. You're looking at the activities first, because you're just trying to scramble and find what is the activity I can actually do with this thing over here and this squeaky toy over here, and you're kind of working it backwards. I feel like it's something that we do and we can do, and I did a workshop at one point with Sean Stetson from up at AdventureWorks called On the Spot, where we kind of challenged ourselves as senior facilitators to be able to do something like that. But it doesn't create the end product that a proper sequence of planning where you separate those out. That's a really interesting thing that I feel like you both just said those things. I was like, oh yeah, the reason that's so stressful is because it goes against sort of the way the planning and preparation probably should go, which is the way Lisa described it and the way you did it the first time around. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, a highlight of the program for me, and I think it's tied into the fact that it felt risky, ended up being a real highlight. And the risk was that we did this aspect that we had not, at least in my knowledge, done with a sports team before, which was we did this secret person concept. Yeah. And so on the first morning, everybody got an individual letter that was addressed to them. And it in summary, it said, like, you're assigned to this person to watch and observe. And at the end of the program, you're going to speak in front of the rest of the team about what you observed about this person. And the reason it felt risky to me is because I didn't know if that was enough time for the observation. I also, anytime something's unprecedented, I feel is a little risky. Like, we had never done this with a hockey team. And then 3, I think I was in my head a little bit of like, is this touchy-feely? Are they going to think this is tacky? I think the fact that we had the materials to do that was not lost, was like an anchor point for me. Like, I was so excited to do something that I wasn't sure about. And I realized how privileged I am to say that. Like, I did not have like debilitating anxiety. I had more like, I'm not sure how this is going to go. And that sense of mystery, I think, sustained my energy throughout day 1. And then at the end of day 2, the secret person ceremony, if you will, it did feel ceremonious to me based on where we were. We were in their sort of more formal locker room, and everybody was sitting beneath their name. And it was beautiful, Chris.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I'm not sure how this relates into the conversation more. Maybe I just want to tell the story, but I think maybe the lesson is like having some aspect of the program that's novel and unique to you as the facilitator can be something to do on purpose, and that had nothing to do with our luggage getting lost. But I think that sense of how is this going to go was
Yeah.
very sustaining. And the fact that it ended up going great is a huge benefit. I don't know if I would even talk about it if it didn't go well, and all the credit to the athletes.
Yeah.
And I don't take no credit for that. They took that to a different level, and the coach did a great job summing it up. I don't know if you would add anything to that scenario, Phil.
No, I would just add that I think that there's something in there in terms of being able to deal with like stuff not going right, is that you still have parts of the program that are tied into something that is meaningful to you in some way as a facilitator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that like that was, and I was witness to that experience, and it was very powerful. And I think in the same way that something that gave me confidence in the program was I tend to be very playful and I'm also competitive and like to play. And so we did a Ubuntu championship game, which I've never seen it to this level where the team got so into it. They were cheering, they were screaming. There was a tunnel of human bodies, like a tunnel formed of arms as people came in and the players came in. And I also played a very competitive game of tweener-ball where I was competing and I got a wound from it. I got an injury, a poor little scratch on my elbow that resulted in me having to go to the medical facility and got treated. And they said, "Do you want me to clean this?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely." And I got the full medical treatment. And players walked past and said, "Phil, what on earth happened?" And I said, "Well, when you're at your peak physical condition like myself, when you're an athlete, then sometimes you sacrifice your body for the game." But just adding like that, like there's a level of humor and connection with the players and laughter and joy that I find very beneficial in programming. And I know that the program is going well based on that energy, regardless of the activities. And so I think both of those segments for our own personal facilitation styles, they kind of make that a successful program, because the activities therefore don't matter because we still have something that's important to us as a feature.
I love that. It was something that I remembered talking about facilitation, and as you get to be a seasoned facilitator and your bag of tricks does get a little deeper, but we still, as I mentioned, I have 5 activities that I tend to do all the time. But when I learn about a new activity or I see a new activity, there is a bit of an excitement to, can I work this into a program? Will it do the things I think it can do with this client that I feel like would be a really great thing? I once, and I'm pretty sure it was Seinfeld, who, when he finished the Seinfeld show, threw out all of his jokes and said he would never tell any of those jokes again. And he started fresh and was only able to do 15-minute sets. And the sort of analogy that I used to bring to the comedian versus sort of what we do in facilitation is that you usually, activities that are going to work, that work every time. And then when you have something new, I try to sandwich it around things that I know will work. And then I try that new thing in the middle of it, because it'll kind of prop it up and I can test it out a little bit and see if it's something. So comedians doing the same thing. When they have a new joke, they get a good laugh, then they try the new joke, but they can follow that up with another good laugh to keep the audience going. And I think in facilitation, we do similar things in that we have an activity. We know this is going to hit our mark. This one seems risky. I think it's going to do really well. I think it's going to do what we need to. But I also know I have this activity and this one coming that are going to keep us on track. We're not going to lose the group. We're not going to get off of our themes and off of our message and those sorts of things. Sort of a similar mentality.
You said, Chris, on to co-facilitation and trust.
Yes.
And how, we all have different models of co-facilitation that have worked for us and have not worked for us. I think what allowed this program to also be flexible while also not being as exhausting as it could have been was that at no point did Phil ask me, "Well, Lisa, can you explain your rationale for this? Can you explain what you're going to say and why you're going to say it?" And that would have been okay, like an acceptable thing for a co-facilitator to do. But when I said, "Phil, I want to do the secret person thing," Phil said, "Oh, I love that concept of bookending it. Great, run with it." And I didn't have to take the extra energy to say, "Well, here's all the 10 reasons why I want to do this." I just felt this immediate boost of confidence, like, okay, it's going to work. And when Phil wanted to, I think I said, "Phil, why don't you do a tweener?" He didn't say, "Well, why? Why?" Just, okay, great, like do it. And that's a luxury of co-facilitation and sort of feeling like I could change something without having to then take 80% of my energy is spent on getting my co-facilitator on board. And then I only have 20% left for the audience. I had all the energy for the group because I didn't have to worry about selling anything to my co-lead.
Yeah. There's a huge value in co-facilitation that I think it does take the right dynamic between the facilitators, but there is a reserve of energy. It's just like, I mean, take this sports team that you're working with. There's a sports analogy here is that you got to get off the ice at some point and rest your legs and to have a trusted co-facilitator who will run with whatever activity you've all planned and deliver it in their own style, in their own way, and with all the equal effectiveness that you're never questioning like, oh, I would have said that differently or whatever. You're just letting them do the thing. It allows your brain to rest, be more engaged, be focused, observing in a different way. I love when you mentioned earlier that your co-lead is as a client, as on the list of clients. Just that you want them to have this quality experience as well in this process. And when you have built that relationship and trust and those sorts of pieces into that co-lead relationship, it makes things that much smoother in the end. I don't have a particular end time that I need to go per se, but I know at some point Phil's going to be like, I have to edit all of this, so knock it off and stop talking.
Mm-hmm.
So should I craftily bring this to a wrap? All right,
yeah. Use your skills.
Ortiz. Let's hear
I'll bring a really smooth ending to this, like
and anything you mess up, I'm keeping in. Okay, go.
Are you gonna do a lightning round? Because I'm ready.
A lightning round. Yes. So
one word answers.
I'm not ready yet.
So I want to wrap this up because I feel like I had written down 3, 4, 5, maybe 5 quotes of key takeaways from this experience that I feel like the listeners of Vertical Playpen could pull out of this. Like, what are some of the things? So what do you think some of the stuff that I wrote down as takeaways, learnings, and I labeled all of them with like clever quotes here.
One of them is play tweener and be competitive, and then go to the medical room and make a joke.
Great. No,
be a prime physical athlete. If you're going to work with athletic teams, make sure you're in peak physical condition.
Yes.
No, I don't think you wrote that down.
No, I didn't write that down.
I don't know, Chris. Will you read them to us? Because I'm very curious.
Well, so there, I had a couple of different themes that sort of were coming to my mind here. Chocolate caking was that theme that kind of came out in that sort of concept, something that we teach here, and I've used that phrase lots, but the way you address that, I feel like that was something that is really well, the not tipping your hand as to what's going on behind the scenes to the client, because their experience and your experience are two different things. And so it's that emotional intelligence that facilitators need to build to understand what your emotions are and how they impact the group. And so kind of keeping those things behind the curtain in some way. I also had radical acceptance. You both said that several times with regards to.
Well, Phil copied me because I said it first. This
is the classic. Like you said it, and he said it again.
And I said it in a way that was much more powerful, right? I'm assuming.
But that radical acceptance, I really loved when you said that. Just it sort of resonated for me as something I want to dig into a little bit. Is that a mantra that I feel like is something I should incorporate into trainings or into my own personal stuff. I just really like that. And I know it was tied to your temperament, style, and disc and that sort of thing, but I love that concept. I also wrote some things down that I can't read. Yeah. I don't know what that word is. That's awesome. And then there was the planning process was another one that just sort of that separation of planning and preparation and that focus on themes and that order of having a process that you're actually following and how important that is. Yeah. Anything else? I had this other one that I feel like, so this is part of that co-facilitating. I figured out what I wrote. The not needing to manage the other person. I think, Lisa, you had said that, just like you didn't feel like you had to manage Phil's emotions and that sort of thing. And when you're in a stressful situation like that, being with a co-facilitator in which you can it sort of lended into that. You can fully trust that they're going to be able to run with that. I don't have to manage your emotions here. We're both on board. We both know the situation. Let's move forward. That sort of thing. That was
a great summary.
Well, I am honored that you allowed me to have this time to interview the two of you. When you told me about the program and that you were going to get there, I was excited for you just to be able to go to Europe and do this program with the team, and continue that tradition of working professional hockey teams. And I was honored that you sort of let me peek behind the curtain a little bit in that planning process. So I was very, very anxious to hear about the story. And so when I received the text that the prop bag had been lost and that you had to pivot in a real meaningful way here, I was really intrigued at how that went, and to be able to talk with you all about the whole story and get the story, because I haven't had a chance. So this was really fascinating for me.
Thank you, Chris.
I can't wait to start up our competitive edge program. I will create the hidden website.
It'll be top secret. Well, Chris, one of the pieces of the Apple model and planning is sort of, do you have the right expertise to execute this plan, or do you need to get help from others? And I think a flash of brilliance that I had was say, we're going to bring in Chris Ortiz, and he's going to be a consultant with us on this design. And I'm grateful that you said yes, and you were a big part of it. So thank you.
I am so glad that I got to be a part of designing a thing that you never got to do.
Yeah. I was going to say that too. The one thing that Chris helped us with was in the bag that we lost.
I mean, yes, cycle time was in particular, but you looked over the whole plan, and I think just, your experience with this audience, Phil, you have a lot more experience with this audience than I do. It helped my confidence greatly.
I mean, I think that's a huge part of this too, right? So being confident in your work and what you do. And so I know personally, and all of the audience out there in vertical playpen land knows that you all should be very confident going in any program. You would be in my top 5 choices of people to go on any of these excursions with, for sure.
I want to know who the other 3 are.
Oh my God!
That's
another podcast episode is where we rank our facilitators that we know.
I dropped that out there just on purpose. There, that'll be.
If you believe you're also in the top 5, let me know.
That's fantastic. So thank you all for listening to Vertical Playpen. We'll see you next time when we talk about season 3 of The Bear.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chris.
In the future, we have to unpack that one.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.